Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, we are joined by John Graham. He is the founder of Good Samaritan Home, a nonprofit helping people restart their lives after prison. Excellent work, which is definitely needed to be done. And we're probably going to be talking about his debut novel, Running as Fast as I Can, which has gotten 26 awards. And he's all about your ability to change your life and how to, live well far into many years. And this is very interesting for me because I also share the idea that life was a sprint, not a marathon. And I'm turning 37 in 3 months, and I have discovered not so. And so this is going to be the perfect conversation for me at a personal level, but we're here to hear the whole story. So welcome, John, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
I'm very glad to be here. And if you were to look at Facebook and all the internet people who look like they've made their million by the time they're 13, and they're all perfectly shaped, and they have the perfect head of hair that never thins out, you begin to think that life is a sprint, and it takes a very good publicist to be successful. But I'm finding that, at least in my life, it's a lot slower with a lot more detours. And thank God it is a marathon.
Well, yes, I mean that is yeah, I mean that is something where, at a very kind of in reflection of your own statement, when I was very young, I kind of figured out that if I wanted attention or people to pay attention to me in any capacity, I needed to do something because I like to I'm live in my head. I like to talk about ideas and stories and things, which is why your podcast recording started late. And so that's kind of where I live, but no one else in my life lived in that place when I was young. And so I started doing music and performing arts and all this type of thing. And I always felt at a young age so behind. And so I was teaching and I was working in the state senate, and then I was going to college. I did my undergrad degree in 2.5 years, got my first graduate degree when I was 23, and all this type of thing. But then I graduated into the financial crisis. There were no jobs. No one wanted to hire me. Nobody still wants to hire me. That's why I do this. Um, all this sort of thing. And there's been so many weird and odd detours. I've had so many weird and odd jobs. I have more resume, gaps than anything or anyone, which has kind of rendered my whole life to become a bit. And I find myself now at this very strange crossroads when I'm kind of like, I am nearer to 40 than not. And I thought I would have made it by now, had some success. It's never really happened. I just kind of have these weird collection of jobs, experiences, relationships, all this type of thing, and I don't know what to do with it. So, again, as I said in the intro, I'm fascinated to hear about your perspective in your book because this is so germane to me personally, which means I know it will be good for the listener too. So, I share that sort of idea.
I read a piece about several people who had a similar resume to you and I, and the one was Cezanne, who did
Yeah.
not really become noted for his artwork until he was well past 40 and nearly 50. And his greatest work, what he's known for today, was in the latter third of his life. And that's just one example. Most
And he had to
people,
escape Nazi Germany in a crate on a ship.
I'm sorry.
Cezanne, and during the Nazi rule of Germany, he was Jewish and he had to escape. They packed him in a wooden crate on a ship to smuggle him out of Germany to
Well, now
America.
see, I did not know that. I did not
Yeah,
know that.
I just found that out a little while ago. I didn't know either. I don't think most people know. Yes, he was literally shipped to America in a
Now that's interesting
crate.
because the Nazis were trying to steal art, and so
Yes.
he had to steal away himself bodily, which is even
Yes.
more dynamic.
Yes, yeah, I mean, talk about a crazy life detour. Let's say, yeah, yeah, one day I was painting and then Hitler invaded and all of us I was shipping myself
Yeah.
to America FedEx. Like it's sort of thing. So it's yeah, it's no, there's I mean, Grandma Moses was the same situation. I mean, there's so many people. I mean, a lot of people online will always say, like, life begins at 40. I have a friend of mine who's in his late 50s now, and he's kind of like, and he tells me the same thing. He's kind of like, you need to hang on 3 more years. He's like, because it's gonna be all like life opens up for you in a couple of years, sort of thing. Um, And I'm getting used to that idea, but I still find it cold comfort. Does that make sense? Like, especially
That,
in our youth obsessed culture where it's like, oh my God, you're 25 and not a millionaire and don't own three houses. What are you doing with your life? Go kill yourself. Like social media has, I think, rotted our brains on this stuff, don't you think?
well, growing up in the post-war era, 50s and 60s, there was a great deal of emphasis on materialism because our parents came out of the Depression.
Mm.
But my generation reacted to that materialism, and out of that came the Beat generation, the Folk generation, the civil rights protests, the Vietnam War protests. So there seemed to be more of an emphasis on eternal values, intrinsic values. And of course, free love became very expensive after a while. But
Mm.
but in general, I think we in the '90s we went back to that materialism, and we were the stock market and the real estate boom, and we thought that I had to be successful to be popular, to be successful emotionally. I had to be successful financially, and I'm finding that it's coming back, and I think that's one of the reasons why there's been such a positive acceptance for my novel, because it's about the marathon, that it takes time to grow up. It takes mistakes to grow up. We don't find our niche at 25 or even 30. Some of us have to be like me. I was 53 years old when I finally found where I fit, and I didn't publish this novel until I was 75. And I could not have done it earlier because I didn't have the material. I didn't live enough. And I think I'm not alone. What I'm hearing is this is a normal attitude for many people struggling to find their place.
Yes, well, we've gone off too much about myself per usual. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your book to begin with?
Well, just as background, went to college like many of us in the 60s, got a degree in psychology thinking that I would fall into something and have my niche immediately. But I went from being a children's home counselor to a truck driver to a fireman to a journalist, a building contractor. I moved through 4 states with my family. And eventually, I even tried my hand at being a minister, thinking I could do some good in the community. But I didn't fit in any of it until my wife and I said, maybe we can help people who are struggling more than us. And we literally opened our own home as a homeless shelter. And we started working with people off the street, trying to give them a second chance. And that opened up doors I never thought possible. And today we have a Good Samaritan Home is a legal nonprofit corporation with 10 employees and 19 houses that we help upwards of 100 men and women on a given day restart their lives. And it literally would not have happened if I had been 20 years old, because I didn't have the maturity then. So it
Yes.
changed my life.
No, that's absolutely
Failure
fascinating.
changed my life.
Yeah, no, that definitely, I mean, there's too many great stories of that. So tell us about the book. What is that about? When did you start writing it?
Well, what happened was there was a lot of blowback in the community about having a shelter in our neighborhood. But what really, really pricked at people was the fact that we were taking in people who were coming from jail and from prison who were homeless. The Department of Correction would refer them because the research showed that if a man coming from prison has safe housing, they are very likely to not go back to jail, but they need housing. So the state would give us a per diem that way they could save prison costs and we could meet our bills, and these fellows could have a place to live. So it worked out very well for everybody. But the neighbors got very nervous, and there was petitions, there were calls to the city council, there were threats, letters to the editor. It got really, really intense. I even had police protection at one point, and it ended up in the courts. But here's what I found, Cameron, is that I tried to convince people of the safety of our program. I gave them data. I talked about recidivism. I talked about the numbers, and nobody gives a damn about numbers. And I hit a blank wall. And so what I found was that the only thing people would connect with was real people. So when I had somebody like Jimmy in our house, who they knew was a homeless man, and I took him off the street, and he no longer created a problem in their neighborhood, then they saw Jimmy was safe. That made our work not just statistically correct, but it was Jimmy correct, if you know what I mean.
No, it's the
Real
power
people.
of narrative over number. A
Absolutely,
powerful
absolutely.
narrative will get you far farther with people than numbers.
I came up with a comparison. Let's suppose that you wanted to go on a cruise, and they're going to have a documentary at the beginning of the cruise on lifeboat safety, and you're supposed to go into this little theater room and watch a narrative on lifeboats. I guarantee you won't watch it because you'll get zoned out completely. But if they showed Titanic and they showed Jack and Rose and what happened when they didn't have lifeboats, I guarantee you'd be looking for the lifeboats and you'd be looking for Jack and Rose in the process. That's what I did. I decided to tell a story about second chances. And that's the book, Running as Fast as I Can. It's about a guy named Daniel Robinson, just a young kid who grew up in an abusive, uh, structurally unstable home, and he spent his life trying to catch up to what he called normal people. And he was just looking for a family. He was looking for a second chance. That story is what people are resonating with because they identify with Daniel, not recidivism data, but they identify with a real person like them. And that's why it's garnered so many awards, is because the story is readable and it's relatable. And it's exactly what I'd hoped. And now people are saying, I feel like Daniel, I understand Daniel. And it's generated these conversations.
No, I mean, my novel has only won 2 awards compared to your 26, but my protagonist is a similar situation. In that in my novel, he kills his stepfather with a cast iron frying pan for molesting his sister. And it's his life
Similar.
afterwards. He goes into prison and he comes out of the system. He's a day laborer, and then he ends up kind of in this drug house, trap house situation, sleeping with this guy who has AIDS that never tells him, and all this sort of thing. And the book ends with him meeting back up with his mom. He briefly dates a stripper, and then he joins a mobile harvesting crew, and that's how the book ends. And so I spent a lot of time in that world, so that it would be as real as possible. And from a public policy perspective, because I have to do the news hour in 3 hours, when we talk about news and politics and everything, um, I have sat with people who've come out of the system and how much help there isn't. That's why I know how important it is, the work that you do. And there are so many people that, if it weren't for the kindness of a guard, a stranger, a social worker, whatever have you, they would have been in no way able to survive, or get back on their feet. And I think that's probably, of all the aspects of the correction system, the biggest gap is the reintegration to society. And most people, don't care about incarcerated people anyway, much less their reintegration back to society. And so the punishment sort of continues onward in this manner. And so I've spent a lot of time with this stuff, so I know how absolutely important this work is. And the fact that you've taken the time to humanize that story is just absolutely, absolutely vital. Because anytime you have something, policy will never get people excited until you put a human face on it. Someone has to be the face of it. It has to be in a person that people can identify with. And see in front of them to understand this isn't just an abstract issue. This is affecting this person. It's very important. And it sounds like that's what you've done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The power of storytelling. I've been really taken aback because, and I'll be honest with you, it was not easy to get it out there because when I finished the story, it took me 10 years to write it. But getting publishers out of New York and agents out of New York, 24-year-old hard bodies, I call them, who have they have no understanding of what happened in 1960 with the civil rights protests. I had Daniel at one point is at Kent State during the protests and shootings,
Hmm.
and I had an agent say to me, "That couldn't have happened. That doesn't seem real." And I said, "Sweetheart, I was there. Trust me. I guarantee it happened." Uh, so I ended up being rejected by New York again and again and again. And I felt just like Daniel being rejected. But what I determined was that if I can just keep moving, if I can just keep trying, then I'll never lose because I'm
Hmm.
always, always ahead. And eventually I found Don Quixote Press, which is an outsider press for
Hmm.
outsider stories for outsider writers. And I thought, this is perfect.
Yeah.
And so now Don Quixote has my book, and we're looking for what we call inmate stories now, something even more intense. The idea was that everybody has a story, and we can help one another with our story.
Yes, no, there's so many. I mean, thank God for indie press. I work for an indie press, who's taken over my books. And no, there's so when I teach in my writing courses, I always tell people, I said, you can go after the big five, but unless your project kind of fits within a very narrowly defined box, that's a hard road to haul. And I had two agents looking at my debut novel, which is unheard of. And I
Yeah,
have
tell me about
another
it.
one in that big document box sitting up there that probably would be suitable. I don't care anymore. So we're not going to bother them with it. But I mean, yes, but if you have, there's amazing, truly new novel, interesting things going on in indie press. If you're a writer listening to this and you're looking for a home for your project, please consider indie press strongly. Um, because there's just so much more dynamism out there with that.
And the truth is, the numbers coming out of traditional publishing are not encouraging.
No.
Most books do not sell more than 1,000 copies if they're lucky,
Yes.
and most sell less than 1,000, even less than 250. And by those standards, Don Quixote is magnificently successful.
Yes, absolutely. So let's talk writing process. It took you 10 years. My first novel took me a long time to write too. What's your writing process like? How do you get the words on the page?
Well, I work in Ohio. Good Samaritan Home is in Western Ohio, but I have staff, so I was able to get away to my writing house, I call it, in Texas. So I would go for 2 weeks, and I would do nothing but work on one chapter at a time. And I had the outline in my head, and I worked and worked and worked, and basically, it was exciting to tell a story because it sounds crass, but you create your own reality as a writer, and I can make the characters go left or right, and the hardest part was sharing that work after 7 years of writing with an editor. And he would look at it and say, "Let's try this. Let's go here. Let's go there." And he just played a butcher, I thought, with my work. But I kept the structure, the basic structure, and I kept the characters that I was in love with. And we argued left and right. But when it was all done, what he taught me was it's not enough to tell a story with facts. You have to tell a story with emotion. And he taught me how to make my characters real and likable. And because at the end of
Yeah.
my first draft, that Daniel was not a likable person. If you've ever read Forrest Gump, the novel,
Yeah.
Forrest is not a nice character.
No.
In fact, I didn't like him, but Tom Hanks and those writers made him into a wonderful, likable character. That's what I wanted to do was make Daniel relatable. And this kid was only 26 years old, a third my age, but he was in many ways far beyond me in his abilities, and I learned from him. And maybe that's the lesson.
Yeah, no, no. I went. There's a book we're about to release called About Not Losing, and it was written by a neurosurgeon about his malpractice trial in the late '80s, early '90s, in Denver and everything. And we chopped it down a lot. It arrived to me at about 160,000 words. It's going to publish at 120 21,000 or so, about 405 pages. And every time I do a developmental edit or a book coaching client, I always tell people, we're gonna go through a lot together. I'm gonna be your book coach. I'm also gonna be your therapist because we're gonna go through a lot together. And we're gonna, cut stuff and move stuff around and all this type of thing. But if it goes well, we're gonna end up with it something better at the end. And my proud moment in that project was when the guy called me, and at this point we were talking at least once a day, if not multiple times a day, for at one point during the project. And he said, I just got done reading it. I didn't know my book could be this.
Yeah.
It's like you've
Yeah.
created these people, these characters, these arcs. I didn't know, because for him it was reporting these memories. It was kind of a, here's what happened, here's how it went. And I said, yeah, that's great, but let's tell a story. And he's like, I didn't know it could be this. I had no clue that what we're gonna publish was in that manuscript. And
You
I
said
said, that's
he's
my
a doctor.
job. Like,
You
I
said
didn't
he
want
was
to just
he was
report a trial. I wanted to tell a story, and we told a story.
he was a doctor. Is that correct?
Neurosurgeon, yes.
I see that right there, because he's trained like I was in the academic research.
Yes.
You're trained to be factual because you don't bring emotions into your writing, and we had to learn to be the exact opposite. And that's hard. It's like a foreign language. But once you realize that that's where you communicate with people emotionally. So I
No,
learned from
right,
Facebook.
yes. No, and it is very true. I did both. So I did my first graduate degree. I studied terrorism, asymmetrical political, asymmetrical warfare. I studied, communism, insurgencies, and counterintelligence and counterinsurgency and all this type of thing, in political science. And then I got into creative writing more in my mid 20s and then got a degree in it, and they are completely different worlds. It was a totally different way of being, way of relating, way of doing things. It is so very different. But it engaging in that way is intrinsic to telling a story. And that's what's so important and vital.
Well, what it did for me, Cameron, was I realized that number one, I'm not doing this for money because Good Samaritan Home is my job, but I wrote for the sake of telling a story. So if I make $3 on a royalty on a book, and I make if it cost me $6 to make an ad on Facebook, and I made three, it doesn't matter because maybe that one person who read it will be changed by it. So that's to me, that's my cost of doing business, of sharing that story of second chances. And what mattered was I set out to tell a story and I did it. So I can die feeling like I've completed my journey. I've done my part.
Yes, and I think the amazing part to per the beginning, sort of the beginning of our conversation, is this all took place in the second, the big second act of life sort of thing. After you had bumped around and wandered around doing all that other stuff, and then finally found your passion, and then found a way to tell a story about it as well. That is its own journey. When is the memoir coming out?
Well, Somerset Maugham in his story of human bondage was actually the backdrop. It was the outline for this story about a young boy who grew up with a club foot, and he was raised by aloof uncle, and he never connected emotionally. And I thought, that's not abuse as we define it physically or sexually, but it certainly is abuse. And he ended up repeating that abuse pattern by getting into self-destructive relationships. And I thought, that's exactly what I'm dealing with my residents. They've come from dysfunction, they've come from abuse, and that's all they know is normal. But yet I'm not that much different. And I think what we found is that there are so many people that are quietly desperate. They just don't even know they're desperate because they just keep busy with their phone in their hand.
Living lives of quiet desperation.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Henry David.
Mm.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when I read through some of the Amazon reviews or Goodreads reviews, I'm taken aback by these people who are total strangers to me, but they're connecting with Daniel. I even had a 91-year-old man tell me one day that he stayed up till 3 in the morning because he couldn't put the book down. And I
Yeah.
thought, that to me is what it's about.
No, no, absolutely. It's that's the sign of good storytelling. Absolutely. It's I was having another conversation where I was talking about the first time I ever read Watchmen. Read the whole thing in two sittings, and it's very long and sort of thing. And he countered with a story of a Vietnam War veteran he'd heard about from a mentor who read the Iliad in one sitting because he found it relatable to his situation with PTSD and everything. That's the power of good storytelling. It can suck you in and just keep you there for the longest time. And I mean the fact that, as a writer, when your words have had that effect on someone, it's the most, in my mind, it's the most wonderful feeling in the world.
The sad part is, if you can say if sad's the best word, is that I can't watch television the same way I used to because now I keep saying, bad plot twist. I saw it coming. Keep writing. They
Yes.
hurried through that. They telegraphed
Yes.
that scene.
Yeah, yeah. I have a master's of finance and creative writing. Watching TV with me is a master class of storytelling, whether you want to sit through it or not.
And when you
So,
find good writing on television, you say, why don't we do more of this? But
yes,
it's
I know.
rare.
There's a great show on Apple TV Plus right now called Silo, which is based on a book, and they just finished the second season finale last week, and it was just amazing, amazing show. If you haven't watched, please go watch. And the writing on that show is so so good. I might have to go pick up the book series. Because if the TV adaptation's that good, the book has to be better, so I need to go invest. And yes, great storytelling is, yes, when you do find it, especially in a visual medium like that, it's truly magical. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, when I get a story that makes me want to turn the page, when I'm flying, for example, if I don't have something to catch my interest, the flight takes forever. But if I
Yes.
can get into a good story, the plane could crash and I wouldn't notice it.
No, I mean that's the power of story, that's the power of great narrative. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to do and to be able to deploy and to be able to tell a story like that in such a wonderful way. So,
Well,
what's next on your storytelling adventures? What happens from here?
well, after I finished that, of course, I've been with an indie publisher. You have to do a lot of work with them, and
Right.
so I've had to learn to speak TikTok and Facebook and Instagram, and learning all the work that goes into publishing. And it sounds crass, but you're basically trying to sell your book. But really, I'm trying to sell the conversation. I want to generate the conversation, but that's extremely time consuming. So I put my energy now in doing small projects like Substack newsletters,
Yeah.
and actually it goes back to my journalism days when I would write small stories, and
Yeah.
and that's been very satisfying, particularly today. There's two things going on. Number one, the politics has changed; it's become much more volatile, no matter which side you're on. And
Yes.
the role of the church has changed where it's become political. And I come out of the church background, so I'm still aware of that. And I'm very disappointed in how the church has lost what I feel to be its original mission of serving rather than being served. And
Mm.
so my story sometimes will deal with that. So I'm not trying to be political, but I deal with social expectations that cross into politics. And that way, when I read New York Times or the Atlantic Magazine or Vanity Fair, I look and say, how do I translate this into my readership so that I can put it in their terms? And it's kept me very analytical rather than emotional with today's politics. Rather than saying I'm for or against that candidate, I want to say, what is he really saying, and what is really going on here? And I think it's allowed me to keep my sanity, but I feel like I'm a frog in the kettle. The water is getting hotter and hotter, and before I know it, I might just boil. So I have to be careful with anything political.
No. I
But
mean, no. I mean, the other half of this show and this brand is I do news commentary on politics, and I will be doing my weekly news hour here in a little bit. And we are recording this on January 20th, 2025, which means President Trump was inaugurated today. So tonight's news hour is going to be a hoot and a half. But it's been a very long day already, and it's going to be a very long news hour this evening, and a lot of people are going to be watching, and so it's going to be great. But yeah, I feel the same as well because I will go from talking about storytelling and books and all this type of thing, and at 7 o'clock I go live and we'll do the news hour, and then I have another recording after that talking to a woman from Palestine because that's not an apolitical conflict at all. So this
wow.
is the world I live in. I totally understand you.
While you're talking to her, see if you can resolve some issues over there because they've only been at it since 1948.
Yes, and even before that, no, I've actually had a lot of this show has been a celebration of the Palestinian diaspora. Very early in this show, I had a woman on named Alice Rothschild who was an anti-Zionist Jew who was doing work with Palestinians. I had a woman named Maya Aluyu who she did a collection of Palestinian writers and we talked about storytelling in the literary community in the West Bank, and I immediately wanted to go there after talking to her. I immediately wanted to visit them and have coffee in a coffee shop and talk about writing and stories because it's in the midst of all of that, they have a vibrant literary community. Can you imagine? Um,
Mm-mm-mm.
and then tonight, this woman has published a book about her husband's escape growing up in Palestine and her escape from all of that. So there's been a kind of insistent throughput in this show of me talking to these people and telling these stories and all this sort of thing. And especially in light of the recent ceasefire. Again, we're recording on January 20th. In light of the recent ceasefire and everything, it'll be more even more interesting and prescient to have that conversation. So. Yeah, it's a
You're going to
lot.
have a very exhausting day.
It is, but that's what we do and that's what we live for. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so what this conversation has gone incredibly well, and I'm so excited to meet you and I love what you're doing. Why don't you tell us where we can find you online and where we can keep up with you?
I would suggest people go to johndavidgraham.com. That's my website. And there you can link to my Amazon page. And if you want, you can download several free chapters of the book and just check it out. And you can link to Good Samaritan Home and just see what it's about. Interestingly enough, there's even some of my newspaper articles I used to write. I used to write a humor column. I called it
Oh,
Slice of Life. And my favorite was a story called I Met the Devil. And that was the story about meeting, and the devil came to me when he was 9 years old in a uniform of a Girl Scout selling cookies. So you can see where the story's going.
yes, yes. No,
Yeah,
that's
I ended
yeah.
up with Thin Mints who were not actually thinning at all, but I did love those.
Well, no, that's tremendous. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast. I appreciate having you on.
Well, my pleasure. And folks, if they do read any of the book or Good Samaritan material, I can be contacted there. Just give me a buzz, and I'm glad to answer any questions somebody might have about second chances.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.